Welcome to the Soccer Geeks podcast, hosted by Jason Barbato.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Soccer Geeks podcast. I'm your host, Jason Barbato, and not with me this afternoon, evening, or morning, wherever you're listening, is our show's producer, the amazing, the illustrious Marissa Callie. Marissa's not able to be with us because she is on assignment. Let's just say she's on assignment. She's got a bunch of projects she's working on. She's not able to be with us this evening because when I'm recording this, actually, it's at night. And I'm super excited to have a very close friend of mine and a close friend to the show, Rory Sutherland, who's going to be joining us. He is a physio. He focuses on sports science, and that's just a fraction of the knowledge that he has that he wants to share with you today, whether you are a parent, player, or coach. He wants to drop some knowledge bombs on you. And so without further ado, let's bring Rory on here. Hey, buddy, how you doing? Welcome to the show.
I'm so stoked to be here. Thanks for having me.
Now, Rory, just for sake of argument, there is, as I've coined it, the droid army that follows after your last name with all your titles. You've got an MS, a CSCS, an EPC, and an FRC. So can you let us know what the little droids that follow your name / your title and all of your educatory degrees, can you decode some of that for us?
Yeah, sure. And there's more after that too, but I figured I should cut it off at a certain point. And, no one really knows what they mean anyways.
Sure.
So the MS is obviously a Master's of Science, and that's in exercise science. I got that over at PLNU. And in that discipline, you got to take some sports performance, but also you got to, if you wanted to, you could look at what's called stress testing, which is more of an exercise physiology approach. So we got a healthy mix of health, sports performance in that curriculum. And I can't recommend it enough. Great faculty over there. So after that, there's the CSCS, which is kind of like the gold standard strength and conditioning certification. Still another one of those things that really gets you in the door. Doesn't necessarily mean you're a good trainer. It's a fairly difficult test, but got that guy there. And the EPC is the exercise physiologist. And I do some work in exercise physiology, specifically in cardiology, which I enjoy. I enjoy a lot just because it's more of like the organism standpoint. It's more of just looking at someone in a laboratory setting where you can control a lot of variables. And it teaches you a lot about humans and exercise. So I like that. The FRC is just a mobility certification. So I figured like those things rounded everything off. But like I said, there's other certifications down the way, but it's not like anyone knows what they are. And,
Sure.
To a degree, at a certain point, it's really what you're now, if you can apply that, what is your experience? How have you used that knowledge? That's really what impresses me nowadays about trainers is how can they take, that cutting edge stuff and apply it in a real world setting? Because that really matters.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. And that's kind of partly of why I really asked you to be on the show. One of the things that I talked to you about kind of before hand was about kind of decoding the jargon that we see. Because if we just deal with kind of the high level words and phrases and concepts, the average person, the average athlete is not going to really be able to internalize that content and then know how to apply that rightly to their situation in their body. So parents, coaches, players out there, that's one of the things that we kind of aim to do in this conversation this evening is kind of help decode a little bit, also help kind of demythify some of the myths that are out there about training and about how much is too much and when is it right to hang out and to see somebody who is really a movement specialist. When is it appropriate to have your kids talk with a movement specialist and or a physio, something along those lines. And so, just kind of to give a broad brush view, for our audience there, just kind of what the content, hopefully, in the context of our conversation will be. With that kind of said, Rory, I'd love if you would kind of share your philosophy of physiology with our audience so that we kind of have an idea of your approach to your applied science to specifically the sport of soccer.
Yeah, so I would say my approach and how it might differ from others is I'm an energy system first type of person. So you might look as that like more of a cardiovascular exercise or like an aerobic type exercise, how much can you endure? So, the common terminology is going to be endurance. Now, endurance means a lot of things to me. It's not just like how much can how high can you get your heart rate? How out of breath can you get? And for how long can you do that? Obviously, that matters. And when I came into my role, in sports performance for soccer, that was one of the first things that was said to me anyways, which was, hey, we're seeing a drop off later in the games and we want to take care of that. Now, the reason why I go this, aerobic first approach is because it's kind of the foundation. It underlies everything else. What a lot of people don't understand about being good at endurance is how much it heightens every other aspect of your performance and your training. So what I love to tell lifters is like, if you build that aerobic engine, if you build that foundation, you're going to recover better between, your lifts. You're going to recover better from your trainings. You're going to recover better after your games. Even your lifts that you're doing, your reps are going to be more quality later on in the session. And the research shows that more quality reps means more quality adaptation. So I really like to take care of that first. And also too, you can't cheat endurance. Like there's no way around it. It requires time, it requires effort, and that's maybe where we're getting some of our grit. And we learn things about ourselves, when we're pushing that specific system. So, apart from the actual, lungs, heart, and all those things, well, there's also endurance of the hamstrings, and it's endurance in hamstrings and sprinting. We know we do a lot of high speed running in soccer, and I need those hamstrings to withstand all of the things that we're throwing at them, because we know those to be one of the major reasons why players miss time is hamstring strain. So, this idea of endurance, it goes past the lungs and the heart and the breathing and the everyone's idea of like steady state. It goes well past that. You could talk about endurance and repeated sprint, so that's probably my first approach. And then my second approach is postural in nature. And again, like, it doesn't mean that I'm like telling everyone to sit tall with their shoulders back. And every time I say posture, everyone's kind of like back like this and
chest forward, butt back. Yeah, here we go.
It's the worst thing. It's the worst thing that we've done to ourselves is this like chest out approach. Like, I don't want your head hanging forward, but we need to redefine what we understand as posture. And there's athletic postures. So people who are, sprint coaches will talk about, acceleration postures and top speed postures. And then from a corrective or recovery or rehabilitative standpoint, there's postures of the pelvis and the rib cage, of your right knee versus your left knee. I want to understand those postures. How do we keep them in their most variable and neutral place? Because what we do know is that repetitive movement or lack thereof, we're going to start to affect these postures. And now we're starting to put a little bit of wear and tear on one side of a joint, or we're starting to overuse one specific set of musculature. And if there's anything we know about the body is that, it's we have proprioceptors. We also have exteroceptors like light, the environment, how that impacts us. But we also have interoceptors. So when our internal environment changes, it can be very damaging to performance. It can be very damaging and increase risk of injury. So I would say those are kind of like my two main things that I go at first. And they're kind of umbrella terms. So, yeah.
And you've worked with both. I mean, just for context, you are currently working with the Boys Academy at San Diego Surf, which is one of the top boys youth academies in the country. You've been working with them for several years now. And so, they've kind of given you free reign to apply this philosophy kind of at the academy level across multiple age groups. And can you share with us, at least from the philosophy that you've applied there? Obviously, you've kind of tweaked and learned some things along the way, right? Because there's the chalkboard talk, and then there's kind of what happens on the field. And as things kind of go, you always have to adapt and adjust for the audience you have and things like that.
Yeah.
So can you kind of talk about maybe some of the things you have learned along the way in the last few years by implementing this philosophy kind of across the board for age groups? I mean, and so for our audience understanding too, this is obviously dealing with more of the male side, because that's where Rory's had the primary chunk of his
Mhm.
from a physio side, from a team side. But that doesn't mean that you don't also do one-on-one sessions for female
Yeah.
athletes
Mhm.
and people in recovery of all age groups, because you're not an ageist. That's one thing I know about you. So go back to that surf question really quick. Kind of what were some of the things that you learned along the way and some of the results that you saw through this applied philosophy?
Yeah. So, well, I'll bring up one specific thing that we've done. And when I say it, if any of my players listen to this or any of the coaches, they'll know exactly what we're talking about. But we do a lot of tempo running, and anyone who follows my Instagram will concur. And that fits into that enduring aspect, because it's a low hanging fruit. And that's probably one of the main things I learned to kind of hone in at working with surf, is because you come in with constraints. You come in with, how many times you can see the players, right? How long you have, how many are you going to have per session? What's the attendance like? Because that's not always great. So if you're running a
Right.
really specific progression, if you have a guy that's missing, 2 weeks out of that progression, like that's huge. And if he's not doing the stuff on his own time, which I can't go to their house and make them do
Right.
it, that
Chances
could,
are they're not. Yeah.
and chances are they're not, that's really difficult. So,
Yeah.
and the last thing is available equipment and spaces. So, naturally you're at the youth level. I would imagine if there's any other youth strength and conditioning coaches listening, they probably feel somewhat constrained in some way. So you got to find the low hanging fruit. And I've noticed that I've had to do a lot of uneducating before the educating first. You should see or hear about some of the lifting, and maybe to the layman's it won't make as much sense, but from a strength and conditioning standpoint, when I look at what a lot of these kids are doing, it'd be stuff they found on TikTok and Instagram, and they're following people, physique athletes, which is not the epitome of athleticism or strength. And obviously, how many physique athletes do you see playing in the Champions League right now? Not maybe, not very many.
Yeah.
And so with that being said, we do these like tempo runs. I would say the tempo runs have been some of the have made some of the largest return. And
Okay.
why do they do that? Is because, they're I'm getting adaptation for the whole session. That's one thing. It's a very tried and true progression that we can do. The kids can do it at home, which some of them do actually. They'll come up to me and say, "Hey, I'm gonna miss and I need to do this at home. How can we do that?" So we adapt it for them. Love those kids. Favorite guys do that.
Hmm.
And so, with that, we're checking a lot of boxes. So with tempo running, you're getting a lot of high speed running. You're also obviously getting the heart rate up for an extended period of time. You're training a little bit of repeated sprint ability. So if you look at the sport and you look at the activity, you can make a lot of connection with that. It's also a low intensity, like relatively low intensity exercise. They won't tell you that it's low intensity, but
Yeah.
if you understand the stimulus on the particular systems of the body, it to be that, like they can train the next day and they're just fine. So that's been something we've implemented with success. And then our lifting is more on that postural side. I talked about that second thing, where I'm looking at lifts that essentially give them what they're not getting from their sport, and go after the specific musculature that they're straining the most. So for those familiar with strength and conditioning, you're probably familiar with like the Copenhagen plank, a lot of like groin work, things like that. Um, and I kind of take to what's called unilateral lifting, which is like the different. So a bilateral lift would be like a 2-footed squat, whereas a unilateral lift would be like a lunge or a split squat. And the reason why I'm going to opt for the lunge and split squat is because of the equipment that I have access to, which is not the heaviest equipment in the world. So going to a single leg allows us to put them under more load, but also too it's more specific to gait. And if there's one thing I've learned in my work with exercise physiology and all my schooling, is that walking and running is a hierarchy. we are built to do those things. We are just wired that way. We're wired to move reciprocally. If you pertain, a good chunk of your movements with that mindset, you're going to, for lack of a better term, nourish the body in that way. So, I moved to more of like a split squat rather than the squat, because I get like a gait specific type lift and there's more specificity to it. That doesn't mean that we never do squats. I mean, there's a time and place for that. But I like to toe that line between specific and non-specific, and see what makes the most sense for my guys, and make sure that I'm not, that I'm overloading tissue at the right times. That's probably a pretty massive one too. Knowing when to do what. Like, you're not going to do Nordic hamstring curls, before a particularly large field session. Like, just understanding those pieces.
Sure.
And
everybody at home is Googling like Nordic arm curls right now.
The hamstring curls. So it's
hamstring curls.
Yeah, it's the one where you see someone holding on to someone's legs, and they have the guy doing the curl has their arms across the chest, and they're kind of lowering themselves down. They try to do it very slowly, and it creates a lot of muscle damage, and it's a great activity to reduce the incidence of hamstring strain, or to reduce the risk of them. But also too, if you do them before a training session, now you've put them at risk.
You've exhausted them. Yeah.
So just like knowing how to structure a week, that's definitely something that we take, priority in.
So, one thing I kind of wonder, Rory, and, especially in the highly competitive world of youth soccer, right? In that context, it is very rare for a club to employ the services of a movement specialist and or a physio. Apart from cost, because that's a whole different conversation, different time. Apart from cost, why do you think that what you bring to the table is so undervalued in the developmental focus of a soccer club?
All right. Well, soccer's weird about this stuff. It comes down to the skills coach and how much they believe in it. There's some recent videos of Atletico Madrid doing a strength and conditioning session, and 99% of strength coaches out there immediately would write it off and think it's ridiculous. But they were making deep runs both in La Liga and deep runs in the Champions League at that time. Now, that doesn't mean that the training was making them good at the sport. It's hard to look for causation in that, or understand causation with that. But what the problem is it almost, you need to babysit someone to keep them from doing the same thing over and over again. The way the body works is, let's just pretend like before we do any training or playing or anything like that, we just have this plane, and when we do an activity, a river starts to form. Okay. And if there's one thing we know about rivers, is that eventually they'll create a canyon, right? Now, when you're only playing your sport and you're doing it a lot and you have no other movement variability, you're going to create some pretty deep canyons. And what happens is, I love this example of a callus, and this is kind of that canyon type of example. But like, let's say, I don't know, you're trying to learn pull-ups and you get a bunch of calluses, right? And as you're going through it, you notice that callus gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, until one day, you join a CrossFit class and decide to try a kipping pull-up, and that callus rips off. Now, where did that callus rip off? Did it rip off on the thick part, or did it rip off on the perimeter? And you'll notice it ripped off on the perimeter. Why? Because that callus grew so high that the skin around it never got any stimulus. And so it never reinforced itself. And so then you put it through this activity again, and it tore at the weak point. And so if we're looking at it from like a corrective approach, if we're looking at it from a prehabilitative approach, a lot of my job is giving the players what they're not getting from their normal activities. And definitely at the youth level, like the younger level, the basically 14 and under guys, like they need a lot of that, especially because they're they're going to be growing a lot soon, but also too, they're that sponge of learning, and we want to increase their capacity to learn. So that's one of my main things. That's kind of that's one of my main focuses for sure. But then also to the wealth of research that shows that if you're stronger, then if you have a muscle that's strong and it can consistently overload, from the forces that we're putting it through in our sport, it's not going to allow, rupture. It's not going to strain. Like if it can withstand forces higher than the sport, then you're going to stay healthy. Like pretty simple there. Because when injury happens, it's just the force overloading the tissue. So just make the tissue stronger. And it's, I feel like that one's like the most obvious one, it's kind of glaring.
So, obviously every kid hits, every youth player hits puberty at a different time. Sometimes they hit it early, sometimes they hit it late. Girls, there's a whole different, Pandora's box there, because it just, puberty, especially for girls and hips and all those things, like it just affects their bodies differently in a different way than it does male athletes. The other thing to kind of think of, and I was kind of curious if you might be able to comment a little bit on when is kind of like too young, you would say, to start kind of having youth players working with like a movement specialist or like a physio?
Yeah, so that depends on the specialist. There's some people that I wouldn't want working with a kid before the age of, 11, 12. And there's some people that I would be perfectly fine with as soon as they can, run around and somewhat coordinate themselves. And the reason being is just their specific approach. A kid under the age of an 11, 12, and I try to tell parents this because parents get so worried that their kid's going to get left behind if they spend time doing anything else. And that couldn't be further from the truth. The more repetitions, the more exploration you give them, the more you're going to build or grow their capacity to learn. It's not about what they learn, it's the capacity to learn. And at that age,
but most soccer parents out there don't want the kids to learn anything because it has to be soccer.
It has to be soccer. Yeah. And there's a great book called Range. I believe it's called How Generalists, are succeeding in a specialized world. And they kind of make a dichotomy between like specialists and generalists and in athletics and other things too, like chess. It's a great book that I recommend every strength coach read, and then everyone who's interested in growing someone's athletic performance that they should read as well. So coming back to the specialist, their approach, it should be about, like I said, repetition and exploration. I would like them to have more than just a soccer ball. I'd like them to have a tennis ball, a balloon, a physio ball. I want them to have all these different things so that we can be adaptable. I was watching my nephew the other day, and he's still crawling, very young, but there was a balloon there, and he's just crawling and hitting the balloon, and he's having a blast. But you think about it, like there's learning going on there. Like it's not, obviously we can't tell them to learn what's going on or like, create a game out of that, but use that example of like, okay, maybe you have a kid who is struggling with juggling or something like that. Now you change it to like a deflated balloon where they can track it a little better. And then you can just kind of work it back to the ball. So that's what we call a constraints-led approach. And so it really comes down to the specialist. I think it can, like, I know that when I have a child, I'm going to be working with them very early on, but working with them so like I cringe when I see parents and their little kid at the park and they got cones set up and it's very rigid. I hate seeing that. It's more about this energy or this, very like rich environment with a bunch of different stimuli. It's actually a lot how I grew up. We'd go to the nearby park and, my brothers played soccer and we would bring soccer balls, but we'd also bring a tennis racket, a tennis ball, we'd bring gloves, baseballs, footballs. Right. I kind of came up as more of like a multi-sport athlete, but I'll tell you, I can now take understanding from these other sports and apply it to my sport. Like
Right.
I often say that, my history was surfing. I grew up surfing competitively. I often say that I feel like did more for my soccer than anything else. I mean, hard to make the argument that it did more than soccer did, but surfing itself, just
Yeah.
with anticipation, patience, cardiovascular system. There was a lot of good things that came from that. And I wish more parents could have the patience and provide that environment for their young ones.
Yeah, and I think that's really, I mean, I know for me with my girls, them being able to go play flag football, in a boys' league actually was really great for them. Just
Yeah.
something that they could just go, not have any type of pressure, just have fun, express themselves, learn, like kind of feed that athletic curiosity. We during the whole pandemic, we actually spray painted a pickleball court in our cul-de-sac on the
Love it.
street,
Love
and
it.
all the neighbors come out and we all play pickleball, and we probably
Yeah.
do that a couple times a week just to go out there and have fun and just to move, right? Just to get out there to move. Parents and players out there, like, it's okay to play other sports.
Mm-hmm.
The challenging
Absolutely.
thing is, us being in Southern California here, Rory, and especially places like Texas and Florida, where 9 or 10 months out of the year it's outdoor sport play and weather. And so
Mm.
that the challenge there becomes, what do you do in a year-round sport when you want to go play another sport? Then you're not committed, and then coaches get mad. And this is also speaking to coaches too, that you've got to, if you want athletes that will probably get injured less, that will come with a fresh approach to the game, that won't kill their curiosity and their creativity
Mm-hmm.
approaching the
That's a
game
big
of
one.
soccer. These things are really important for them. So don't sacrifice winning today to have a more well-rounded athlete and, quote unquote, that soccer player half a year or 6 months from now, because
Yeah.
those things are good. And then, so Rory, if I understand you correctly, like, it's good for kids to move their bodies in different ways in addition to soccer as much as possible, whether that's
Yeah.
trampoline park, go parkour, if you
Yeah.
can surf it, you got an ocean near you, that's great. If not, go to the lake, pick up a basketball, throw a football. Like, these things are really good for kids to do.
Yeah, and I think it's difficult too, because even the kid at a certain point may just be like, this is all I want to do. I'm dialed in, like, this is my favorite sport and all my
Yeah.
friends are playing it, and it becomes a task. It becomes a task for the parent to how do you gamify these other things to keep them interested in other things, and that's probably the largest piece with an 11 and under athlete, is keeping them engaged
Yeah.
appropriately. And it takes a lot of patience and it takes a lot of energy. And, there's going to have to be some effort from the parent as well to help dictate that. And so that's
Yeah.
one of the factors at play.
Well, I've experienced that a ton. There was a period of time, especially with my youngest, where, she's just getting a little burnout because we do a lot of stuff. They're playing
Mhm.
futsal, they're playing soccer, they've got this, they've got that, just a lot of activities and just getting burnt out. And there's a period of time where it was a conversation like, I don't want to go to practice. And like, you made a commitment. Doesn't matter whether you want to go or going to.
Yeah.
And there was like those periods where you kind of have to carry them a little bit through. You don't want to drag them. You don't want to force them to go. You might
Yeah.
have to here and there, but maybe once
Mhm.
or twice,
It's a real
most
art.
parents, yeah, I mean, yeah, I'm in sales, right? So it's the art of negotiation. You got to know. I don't negotiate with terrorists. My kids are terrorizing my life, but at the same time, it's like, hey, let's kind of work this thing forward, and here's the big picture, and without bribing your kid to go to practice, because that's just horrible.
Yeah.
So one of the things I kind of want to pivot into spending some time of our conversation here, Rory. I really want to talk about injuries and injury prevention.
Mhm.
And, that has to be another massive fear for players. It's got to be a massive fear for parents and for coaches. If you were to kind of give just kind of general advice, not highly specialized, not highly situational or anything like that, but if you were to kind of give some good practical, safe, general wisdom here for ways that players can prevent injuries and what parents and coaches can do to help support those habits, what are some of like the top things that you would say would be pretty wise to implement?
Yeah, well, the first thing you got to do if you have, a child that is, circa peak height velocity or past basically, puberty, is you got to get in a time machine. You got to go back and you got to go and introduce all the variability and exploration that we talked about before. But obviously that's not possible. So the first thing you need to do is you need to realize that the sport is the most dangerous thing that they're doing. It's not the gym, it's the sport itself. And it's usually matches that are going to be the most dangerous thing. So, this is a pretty massive, all-encompassing type of discussion, here.
Yeah.
And so it requires a holistic approach. It requires an approach from all angles. Perceptually, they need to be in the right place. It's not even just about how many games they played that weekend. What about outside stressors? What about stress at home, things like that? That's going to have a massive impact on them. So if I were to first approach, good injury risk reduction, right? Because we can never prevent them.
Right.
If I were to approach that, I would keep a bead on, and I'm going to envision this like a parent. I would keep a bead on my child's activity levels and do the best I can from like a minutes played and like a rigor of those minutes. I would try to understand that from a weekly basis. And I would try to make sure that we don't do things, far and beyond what we have been doing. And then take note of when there is a break that we need to be ramped back into activity. That would be the biggest thing, because we see with younger athletes with chronic type injuries, overuse type injuries, is that they'll peak in the early season. So what that means is the preparatory period was not enough. And that doesn't necessarily mean, good warm-ups, like it does mean good warm-ups, but what it means is exposure to those forces in a graded and systematic way. So that could be.
Can you use an example? That's a little jargony. Give me an example. Break that down for me.
Yeah. So one of the things I really like to focus on with my athletes is relationship with the ground. And I actually look at a lot of things like relationships, relationship with oxygen, things like that. So relationship with the ground. So that just means when you hit the ground, what does your body do? How do you respond to it? And so the activity that I go after with that is something like they're called like extensive plyometrics. And so a plyometric is like a jump, a jump or like a box jump, a jump off of a box, things like that. Those are plyometrics. Mm-hmm. And an extensive plyo is usually a lower intensity and more of them. And it's just reacting with the ground. So like a pogo hop, a low intensity pogo hop will just be your 2 feet and you're just hopping up and down, a lot of stimulation or a lot of activity through the foot and the ankle, not a whole lot through the knees. And all we're doing is we're exposing these higher repetition, but low intensity forces through the ankle and foot complex, right? And we can systematically program that through a preparatory period. So maybe the first time you do it, it's like, if we're just doing like a traditional pogo hop, like 2 sets of 10 in the warm up, and then like the 2 days later, we're hitting 2 sets of 10. And the next week we're looking at, 3 sets of 8. Right. And then we work towards 3 sets of 10 and we just kind of progress things out that way. So now, and again, this is like not so sport specific. It's a very controlled environment, but now once we get to a point where we have sufficient volume of these pogos, and maybe we've gone from 2 feet, now we've gone to 1 feet and we've done some directional stuff. Okay. You kind of have to trust, you have to rest assured that now you have exposed the body to enough of these varying forces in the right amount of volume, aka repetitions, that when they experience it on the pitch, they're going to handle it better, right? Yeah. So like, for instance, a knee injury is rarely the knee's fault. It's usually the foot, the ankle, or the hip. It's like a divorce between those structures. The knee is kind of a dumb, strong joint, just as I know what to do. And whereas the hip and the ankle and the foot are like, man, we got all these options. And so, if your ankle and your foot are strong and doing their job and have good reactivity with the floor, then your knee is going to be in a much better place. Your hip is going to be in a much better place. So it's really about that graded exposure. And honestly, I think why people don't really do it that much is because it's boring. It can just
Right.
be boring. Like, it's just sets and reps, and that's where that's where strength coaches are successful, when they can implement systematic progressions like that in a reasonable way. And where players fall off is, they want more variability and they get bored and they can't stick to a schedule. And it's just like, if you could take care of that low hanging fruit from an injury reduction standpoint, just be disciplined in that way, it does so much for you.
So, that sounds like it would really work well with post-pubescent adolescents, right? What about prepubescent kiddos?
Yeah.
I love your point about just overuse and understanding workload. Granted, they're kids, and I mean, like you said, when you were a kid, you went to the field, you had a duffel bag full of equipment. I did the same thing. I mean, from sunrise till the street lights come on. I mean, we were, whatever it was, we were playing. So knowing that kids have a ton of energy, but yet at the same time caring about them and not going too soft on them, but yet at the same time, not teaching them to listen to their bodies. Again, how do we kind of address that issue outside of a game, knowing that, like you said, the games are the number one place that you're probably going to find injuries because that's like the highest level of intensity. How do we kind of help? This is part of that time machine. How do we help kind of start introducing now these other little things to help prevent some injuries?
Yeah. So it's the wheels kind of come off with this discussion. It becomes much more difficult to look at the younger ones because it is so variable. There's not going to be necessarily a specific, tried and true approach.
Sure.
Again, it's all about exposure. It's about a coordination rich environment. So the people that do the best job with the prepubescent type athletes, they set up kind of an American Ninja Warrior course, right?
Okay.
And they're having
parkour.
Parkour. They're having them jump over boxes. They're having them go under hurdles, right?
Tumble,
It's gamified. And I will say, if we're going to look at it from like a performance standpoint, one of the main things they tend to implement is acceleration and speed, right? And those are some of the main things that I would like kids to be exposed to more, is just racing, learning how to start, stop, and change direction, and just let them, use constraints to allow them to manage it themselves, and this is something that the top guys are doing with pros nowadays, is they're trying to get the athlete to find it within themselves so they don't give too many cues. And so that's where constraints come in. I was listening to a discussion recently where, a strength coach was trying to find a way to get their athletes to improve frontside mechanics, which frontside mechanics is basically when you see the leg, the thigh and the knee come up forward when someone's running. That's what we call frontside mechanics, and the legs going out back is called backside mechanics. They couldn't find a way for them to kind of get some elevation in their thighs the right way. And he noticed that if he told them too much, if he explained it too much, that he never got the response that he wanted. Like, he knew what he wanted to see. He knows what a good rep looks like, but he just wasn't getting it. So the constraint he ended up doing was he put a med ball in front of them, or had them hold a med ball in front, and the weight kind of activated their core a little bit to hold them posturally in a better position. And then he just said, kind of bring your legs up towards the med ball as you run. And it just made the click for the athletes. The reps looked better and they learned better. He didn't necessarily, break it apart and, stop them in a place and make them go slow-mo and hold their leg here. And so I want to take that and apply that to our kids, is like, you have to create a situation where they're going to get those repetitions. It's not going to be perfect, and it doesn't need to be perfect. You just say, today with these guys, I'm going to work on acceleration. So how do we work on acceleration? How do we keep it exciting for them? Because when I work on acceleration with my older guys, like it can be pretty dry. It's very systematic. It's lengthened out, and all I want from them is maximal intent. But with the younger ones, it's like, all right, we're going to have them, like we did this great thing in junior lifeguards called beach flags. And you would lie down with your hands like this, and you had to race to get these like little, I think it was hose that was chopped up. You just raced in deep sand, but you had to start from this position, and they'd have you doing it forward, and they'd be this like head up, head down, head up, head down. And then like they'd say go, and you'd have to get up and scramble and go. And I can't think of a better way to train athleticism or train acceleration in a fun way, that's competitive and kept us all, gunning as hard as we possibly could. So getting that maximal activation. And they turn us around, and maybe they do the head up and down thing, like a lot longer, so just ways like that. I know that this doesn't really feel like it directly correlates to reduction in injury. But it does. Just that exposure, that movement variability, the options. We need to give the young ones movement options. That's our goal.
And it seems that especially in highly competitive environments, if kids look like they're having too much fun, it can't be serious, and you can't be taken serious. You're not going to get a result. But the reality is that kids actually perform better when they're having more fun. Like that's just reality. Screaming at them and yelling at them and cracking the whip, you might get a little bit more effort, but they're gonna hate you in the sport. So it's kind of about having that long-term vision, I guess, there for the totality of the athlete. Rory, I know that we could again, without the wheels falling off another topic and things like that, we could probably go on talking about these things for hours. And what I really want to kind of wrap into before we get to our last question for tonight, just kind of encapsulate it. And I really value what you have to say to our audience. And one of the things I would just say for you guys that are listening to this now, Rory does a really, really good job of breaking down a lot of these concepts on his Instagram page. Which is found at Sutherly underscore.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's at Sutherly, SUTHERLY _ on Instagram. And there's a lot of great content there. And so for any of you that have questions, it's a great opportunity for you to reach out to him directly in that regard. Rory, one of the things that we always ask, it's the final question we always ask kind of on the show here. And, what I want to do is I want to give you the ability to wave a wand, to rub the lamp and get one wish that you would get in pertaining to soccer in this country. And I just would want to know from you, if you had the ability to have one wish of yours in the game answered, what wish would that be, and to what effect would that be for the game in our country?
So, that's a tough one. Really for me, where I'm at now in regards to sports performance and as it pertains to youth athletes and where I see where they're at and where I see where they're going, I want them. I would prefer that we had a better education for how to take care of ourselves. A lot of the things that I want to implement get pushed back because of uneducating some things out of people, debunking myths and things like that. I love that my players will go to the gym on their own, but when I hear about what they're doing, it's unfortunate. It's at the wrong times. It's the wrong type of movements. It's in the wrong sets and reps. It's driven largely by social media and people that don't play the sport, don't understand, true athletic performance. So, what I would like, what I think is to be the most beneficial is an increased education. And that can be from people like me, that can be from people like me doing little, webinars to parents and players and things like that. But also too, just general education, PE classes, at least in my day, were like, hey, go and play. There's a go and play.
You're too young to just throw out like a back in my day.
Hey, back in my day. No, it was. I loved it.
Yeah.
I mean, I loved to
Yeah.
play. I wasn't doing schoolwork. That's all I wanted to do. I'd come home and I get to play some more.
Yeah, dude.
But what I would prefer is more of a focus on, skill acquisition, and then also to education on our bodies, how they work. Just some of those low-hanging fruits that we talked about. I think as a whole, athletically, it would make a big difference in our health and longevity, which, what's the main thing that we're looking to do with our athletes is to keep them playing, which means reduce the risk of injury. The less time they're playing, it's worse for the athlete, it's worse for the team. So if we can manage that the best, then we're going to be more successful as a whole. Recently we've been seeing stuff, injury issues with, Pulisic and Reina, and people are like, is it a USA thing? Is it a Dortmund thing? What's going on with these guys? And I don't think it's really any of those things. But regardless, I think, from a performance standpoint for US soccer, there's a time for intervention that we're missing with a lot of our players. And when I get my U19s, U17s, U16s, it's kind of too late.
Right.
And so, and unfortunately I can't reach everyone. It takes a tribe to kind of to change this whole ordeal. So
sure.
I would say that's my biggest thing. And that's just really because I live it. I also deal with general population. I see the effects in a lot of my general population patients of what lifestyle leads to what. I got people coming in that are 80 years old and they didn't know that they're supposed to breathe through their nose through most of the day. They're just like, no one ever told me. So I've been breathing through my mouth. And, and it's like, it took that long. And this orifice on your face, you weren't using, in the main way that you're supposed to, it's not just for smelling your food. So that for me is pretty massive. And it may be underwhelming to some of the sports performance people out there, but like, in the end of the day, I want healthy people and I want healthy athletes. They're not all going to make it. And so, I want them to know how to handle that part of their lives. Just because I think as a community, as a nation, things get better that way.
1,000%. I mean, our relationship with sleep, our relationship with our sport, our relationship with other humans, our relationship with ourselves, our relationship with food, all these things are really valuable. And frankly, we tend to have people focus on, the equivalent of the tabloids in the supermarket. That's pretty much what now lines all of our social media feeds in comparison and thirst posts and all these other things now. And it's to keep a really good balance is incredibly and increasingly difficult in a day and time like this. So, but that's a different conversation for a stronger drink, as I like to say, Rory. And but I just want to say thanks again for coming and bringing, kind of, again, giving to us some of that approach to your applied science in the sport. Kind of allowing us to see a glimpse of why it's so valuable, and the earlier we can have these conversations, the better. But hey, listen, the reality is, listeners out there, is it's never too late to start. It's never too late to start to kind of correct some of these habits. It is never too late. Never. Never. No one is past the point of being able to work through some of these challenges and stuff like that. So,
absolutely.
And God bless Gio Reyna's hamstrings. Dear Lord, please bless him. So, hey, Rory, thanks again. Hope to have you on the show again in the future, man. Always appreciate it. And again, everybody out there, check Rory on his socials. He is a wealth of information. He's also an incredibly nice person and will definitely let you ask any question under the sun because he's super kind in that regard. So, Rory, thanks for coming on the show, buddy. And we're going to see you next time. Sound good?
Sounds great. Thank you.
Thanks again. Thanks again, buddy. Catch you later.
See ya.
Bye.